Our team, welcome back to Plastic Surgery Untold, greatest podcast in the world, as voted by us. I'm Dr. Johnny Franco, board-certified plastic surgeon here with Austin Plastic Surgeon. Today we're talking all about where should I get my breast implants placed. This has been a super interesting and common question we get from our patients, whether they're interested in their breast augmentation or breast implant exchange. I wish I could tell you that the answer is super simple. I also wish I could tell you that there was one set answer, but that's not true. It's actually pretty interesting because it's evolved over time, and the idea behind this is the evolution of where to put those breast implants has evolved as the breast implants themselves have continued to improve and innovate over time. Some of this innovation has allowed us to protect the natural anatomical architecture of the breast implants. And this has really come to light as part of this transparency trend. Kylie Jenner talked a lot about how she had her implants placed half under the muscle, and we'll get into what that actually means, and has actually in the past been one of the most common ways breast implants were placed. There's lots of reasons to place the implants either under, above, or partially under the muscle for various factors, and we'll get into what those actual factors are for this. But before we get into that, why don't we dive into a little bit of what the natural anatomy is. We'll actually talk a little bit about implants, even though that'll be for another date, because that really dictated why we did a lot of the things we did in the past. Really had to do with the limitations of the breast implants available in the United States. As many of you know, for a long period of time, saline breast implants were the only ones available in the United States. They were much firmer, a lot more solid, tended to have more rippling, so we need to do a lot of things to give people more of that natural feel and appearance to their breast without looking overly round, overly fake. Unless you wanted that, there was ways to make that happen as well. But using some of that muscle and other architecture, anatomical architecture, could actually soften that look. So let's get into what the natural anatomy is first, and then we'll get into the three different types of placement that you can do. So if you look here and come with me, here's the natural anatomy. Here's the pec major muscle, here's the gland, pec minor, ribs, and then your kind of fatty tissue around that. And this pec major muscle that you can see right here is what people were using to cover that implant. So they were using your natural musculature, whether this was for breast reconstruction or breast augmentation. And the idea was that this was covering the implant, giving you a much softer, more natural look. The only problem was we couldn't control where that implant sat, because of this. And so if you were put this completely under the muscle, that implant would be sitting wherever that muscle decided to stay. And most of our muscles didn't read the anatomical textbook for your breast augmentation. So, with that said, this is where you get into that half under the muscle, or what we call a dual plane. That means that you got this muscle covering the breast implant on top, giving it that softer appeal. Also, there were some thoughts in the past that this decreased the risk of what we call capsular contracture, scar tissue forming around it because of that implant being moved by the muscle. But on the flip side, too much movement can cause what we call animation deformity. We'll get into that on another episode. But the idea behind this is that you have your implant here, you release this bottom half of the muscle down here, and what that allows us to do is it allows the implant to sit just perfectly right behind the nipple. And the purpose of that is that you can get that nice natural slope. You still have a good portion of the implant covered by the muscle, so you're in a great spot with that. Still soft, still natural appearing, but the implant's sitting where it wants to be, or where we want it to be, to give you the look that you're going for. But the problem with that is that you still didn't have any muscle coverage down below. And if I swing around to this side and kind of show you something else, if you think about it, here's the chest, here's the breast, here's the breast. If your implant's sitting here, the muscle comes from the armpit here and then comes to the sternum like that. You've released this bottom half. You don't have any muscle lateral. So this whole kind of area here is where there's no coverage. That's where people typically get more of the rippling and, or feel of the implant. And that's where some of the internal bras, another teaser alert, we'll cover that in another episode, helps to soften that look. So you got your muscle here covering some of that implant. As we come to this side, you can see this is what we would call above the muscle. And there's really kind of two portions to this. Here's the pec major muscle right here. Here's the implant sitting there. You have this strong white layer here, which is your fascia. So this envelops the muscle, but can be lifted separately. So you can do what's called subfascial, where the fascia actually covers that implant, which is typically most common right now when we're talking about above the muscle. But there's going to be some other techniques coming in 2026. There's breast preservation techniques where you're trying to preserve this natural architecture and anatomy of the breast. A little complicated and super cool to show you, but you're actually using a smaller implant, getting a little bit more volume, change for the volume that you have with that, because you're preserving some of these natural ligaments. We'll get that into that in a different episode, but that's coming soon. We're actually going to highlight some of that later this year, but it'll be kind of widely available in 2026. But for now, if you think about it, you're over the muscle, so you're either under that fascia and what's called subglandular. So here's the glandular tissue here, here's the fatty tissue there. You could see there's a lot of pros and cons to this, right? So let's get into the pros and cons for above the muscle. One, you're not destroying any of the natural anatomy, so that anatomical architecture is completely preserved, which we love, because we're not affecting the body, natural strength. You don't get some of the side effects from this of it moving the implant. You're not disturbing the muscle, which makes the recovery a lot faster. Less is more sometimes, for sure. The other thing about this is we're not bound by that pec major muscle. In the past, just like I showed you here, where we got that muscle coming in, the flip side, like you didn't have enough coverage out here, wherever it sit in this sternum here dictated your cleavage. And so because we couldn't come past where that muscle inserted in along this side, so that was our hard stop. That limited the cleavage. It was dictated by your natural anatomy, and that was it. Not saying that we have complete control if we go above the muscle, but we definitely have more freedom, more control than we did when we went under the muscle. So that's been a huge one. Also, too, another pro is that we can get, if you put it under the muscle like you have here, you can get what's called animation deformity. I talked a little bit about this earlier. That's where the implant is being shifted and moved because that muscle is flexing, and it's causing that change in the implant that you can see more readily. Because remember, all these muscles are made to be a pulley system, so they go and come, but now they're going and coming over the implant, and when they shorten, they're going to exert that force on the breast implant itself. So the idea here is that you're not destroying the anatomy. The implant is sitting above the muscle. You're not destroying any of that pectoralis major muscle, any of its attachments. You have more control of the overall space. You're asking, if it's so great, why didn't we do it in the past? Great question. Thanks for asking. The real purpose with this was the limitation of the implants. In the past, let me get back to this. In the past, we had these implants sitting here that were really firm and hard. And I'm referring back to when we had the saline breast implants, with the gummy bear implants that we've had over the past few years. That's why you've seen this momentum to a subfascial or above the implants, as you have some of the new 6th generations that have, a different shell, lower rate of capsular contracture. You have a lot more opportunities. If we come here, we talk about what's the pros for being above the muscle, under the muscle here, is that you do have some extra coverage. You do have the muscle sitting there on the other side, which helps. And when you do that, you actually get into a great spot with all of this. And the idea is that you're giving yourself a little bit more coverage, a little bit softer look to the breast. You're still in a great spot with everything. A couple of limitations are you are destroying some of the pec major muscle, or at least releasing it. 2, you are bound by the limits of that muscle itself. 3, you can get what's called animation deformity, where you're seeing that implant moving. So there's definitely some different options in terms of this. When you're coming back and looking at the anatomy and how that all plays, I think it's really, really important to really think about where those muscles sit. I think thinking about what your breasts look like. If you have a perfectly shaped breast, you have a lot of options. You also have to think about, if you've had multiple surgeries in the past, where's that blood supply coming from? So a couple things to think about, and I want you to understand that there's no one right solution for everybody. There's definitely a lot of options. You're going to see more and more movement towards this subfascial, subglandular breast preservation techniques, as we're not destroying the natural anatomy and anatomy of the breast. The other reason that you're going to see some of this is that with the Ozempic breast, we do worry a lot about rippling, but some of the more cohesive gels and shell techniques are going to help with that. You've also seen some of these implants being a little bit more what we call 100% filled, so they're going to preserve that shape. There's also some new implants coming soon on the market, probably in the next couple of years, that are going to change a lot of this. So I think the more that we can preserve, the more we can keep you in a good spot, the better you're going to do. Definitely a couple take-home points from this is, 1, I think you're going to see more and more implants placed above the muscle. I think if animation deformity bothers you, that's a great option. I think if you're really worried about that implant having some show, rippling stuff, you may still want to talk about under the muscle, or you may want to talk about some of your other implant choices. Also, maybe some internal bra structures to help create more of a barrier over that. I also think if cleavage is important, that's something to really think about. If you don't already have great cleavage before, going under the muscle is going to be very challenging to have. So something to think about if custom cleavage is super important to you. Also, make sure that this all goes in association with what your plastic surgeon is talking about, because, depending on the type of implants you choose, one of these may or may not be as good of an idea. Above the muscle in the subfascial subclavicular and with the saline implant can be extremely challenging, and that's why we didn't do it in the past. So, if you're using a saline implant, this may not be the right choice for you. There may be some new things coming. Maybe that will be a choice someday, but there's some limitations with that. So some of the highly cohesive gels, the implant placement, everything goes together, and that's why there's no one single answer. Hopefully this has been super helpful, talking a little bit about where breast implants should be placed. Plastic Surgery Untold, greatest podcast in the world, as voted by you guys, or really by us, hopefully by you guys soon. But we'll see you guys soon. Bye.